Hello, good evening, students, faculty, staff, policymakers, and business leaders. Welcome to the inaugural meeting of the LBJ Business Policy Forum, Winning the AI Race. Tonight, we'll begin with opening remarks from the Dean of the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs, Dr. J.R. DeShazo, followed by a panel of technology leaders. The discussion will be moderated by my professor of a year-long policy research project on policies for U.S. business competitiveness, Dilawar Syed. And I hope this is extra credit, so we'll see. So tonight, my name is Sophia Mendoza, and I'm a Master of Global Policy Studies student at the LBJ School, and in the class of 2026. It's an honor to open this forum as someone who is passionate about energy, national security, and technology policy. Now in his 6th year as Dean, Dean DeShazo has expanded the school's reach, adding new centers, welcoming new faculty, and launching new degree programs, including the LBJ School's first ever undergraduate program. You can also find him on Instagram with his notable selfies with students, and hopefully me afterwards too. So please join me in welcoming the Dean of the LBJ School, Dr. J.R. DeShazo.
Thank you for that kind introduction. And good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all. I'm J.R. DeShazo, Dean of the LBJ School. And this is an event that I have been dreaming of having for the 5 years that I've been here. And so I want to start by thanking our physical host tonight, the McCombs School, and Dean Mills in particular for her support. For those of you who haven't been to the LBJ School, if you look over there at the stadium, we're on the left corner of the stadium, so the other end of campus. But I think as you'll see, as a result of tonight's conversation, the topics we're going to talk about are really focused on how public policy can enhance or diminish the competitiveness of U.S. businesses, both domestically and internationally. And in so many respects, the American economy and the American business environment is the envy of the world, with incredibly efficient capital markets, tremendous innovation that really is the envy of almost all countries right now. And yet it has felt to me as if over the last 2 decades in particular, both political parties haven't really supported the business development in the ways that public policy could, whether it's workforce, skills, infrastructure, access to critical minerals, supply chain development through commercial diplomacy, technology R&D policy that is turned into commercial technology. There are just so many ways in which public policy shapes our markets and shapes the competitiveness of our firms. So I'm really delighted tonight to introduce the founder of the LBJ Business Policy Forum, someone whom I met only 4 or 5 months ago and with whom I immediately knew that we shared this passion, and he had the unique skills and assets and outlook to really make this vision a reality. And there are a few more seats up here, and there are several seats here. We can probably pull those reserve signs off. We've just experienced a flood of participants. So it's my honor to introduce tonight Professor Dilawar Syed. He is an entrepreneur, a former U.S. cabinet official whose leadership has spanned various public and private sector organizations, including as Deputy Administrator for the U.S. Small Business Administration and Special Envoy for Commercial Affairs at the State Department. He helped drive small business recovery post-pandemic with record federal support and coordinated disaster recovery in the aftermath of Hurricanes Helene and Milton. In a decades-long career in Silicon Valley, Dilawar scaled ventures in AI, software, and consumer web. After his public service, he has joined the LBJ School of Public Affairs and the McCombs School of Business as a faculty, and has, as I mentioned earlier, founded the LBJ Business Policy Forum. He is advising several technology ventures as a board member, and he is a proud Longhorn. I think he chose the two hardest majors you could select. He got a BA in computer science and a BA in economics at UT, and holds an MBA from the Wharton School. Professor Syed, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, JR, for your incredible support. When I look at this room, I have to say, what we were dreaming, it's still surreal to see so many of you show up at this inaugural initiative, and a work that we've been working for several months now. And I want to thank you for your partnership in this endeavor. I want to thank you all for being here tonight and help us launch the LBJ Business Policy Forum, which I certainly hope will outlive us. You know, it's good to be back at UT. You mentioned my roots. I have to say that computer science was 5 times harder than economics. No offense to my econ fellow majors. And I'll tell you, there is no better place than our nation's leading public research university to be convening this dialogue and having this series of dialogues on the United States competitiveness. And one reason I chose to come here is because it's a public research university. And that mission and that mandate helps us produce policies and roadmaps and train the next generation of leaders that represent the breadth of our society. And it's so critically important, especially in this moment in our country. You know, what I saw in my privilege when I was serving the country, and you referred to my work after the disaster recovery, you know, whether it was in the South where we went for disaster response and recovery, or, you know, when I sat across with partners across the world in 100+ bilateral discussions during my work at the State Department, that policy choices we make, often shaped by forums like these, ripple across the globe. And frankly, I, as an entrepreneur, never thought that with the role of public policy in shaping industrial policy, who we partner with, how do we team up with Europe to make sure Huawei is not, creating issues with our national security and so forth. All of that work happens in forums like these. And in this moment, no other phenomena that we have seen in recent modern history, human history, will reshape our societies, will impact our economies, will impact geopolitics with the magnitude and scale that AI would. And that's why we are starting this entire series on competitiveness on how do we win this race for AI. And soon we'll introduce our panelists shortly. And it's important to have this conversation, not just because we want the United States to be ahead of our strategic competitors. That's clearly a key imperative for us. It's also important because we want to deliberate that the United States can actually lead differently. And that's a very important point, especially in this moment in the world. We can lead, we can actually transform the way we look at AI, or model our approach to AI that is grounded in our democratic values that we cannot retreat from, that is grounded in human rights and respect for that. Because we know what an incredibly disruptive technology this is, and we want to make sure that it is in the image of values that we all hold so dear. So before I invite the panelists, I do want to say a couple of things about this forum that Jared and I have been imagining for all these months. First, we want you to know that you're all stakeholders in this forum. As you can see just across the room, we have an entire campus represented here. We made sure it was hosted by McCombs. We've got folks from business school, from our liberal arts majors, from the Clements Center. We have had some fellows here, economics department, and so forth. And it is really not just for LBJ, but for all of our stakeholders. Second, we have business community from Austin. We're also partnering with organizations in Texas who are focused on business advocacy. And third, we have our neighbors here from our community. So this is really the communities around us, and we want to make sure you all know that you are stakeholders in this. And second, and this is a very important point, so I know Sophia said that she'd get extra credit. Actually, this course is part of our coursework, this whole convening series. So I'm teaching a year-long PRP, policy research project, which is a course at the graduate level. And a part of the work we're doing in the course is to have these conversations and have the students reflect on these and produce these actionable policy memos, non-partisans, let me emphasize that will hopefully transcend administrations. So what you see here tonight, the questions that you probe, the discussions that we'll have with Vivek and Amir and Bakari will all be reflected in those memos that we're memorializing. And again, it's community in. And this is why we distinguish that this is not just the work of some ivory tower professors. This actually involves a community that technology like AI will impact. So with that, let me introduce our distinguished panelists. If you can join as I call out your name. Bakari Brock, I've met him recently. Bakari is the general manager and director for Microsoft for Startups. Amir Husain, who's not a stranger to UT, our distinguished alumni and a major supporter, founder of SpecFive and founder of Avathon and author, and Vivek Mohindra, special advisor to Dell, vice chairman and chief operating officer. Please join me in welcoming them. And so the way we're going to drive this dialogue, we'll do about 45 minutes worth of Q&A with our panelists, and then we want to hear from you, and we want to make it as interactive as possible. So let me start with the opener question. In fact, I'll give you the big history of how this question was imagined. We were promoting this on LinkedIn. I actually put out a comment for my network and said, what's the first question you would like to ask? And this is coming from our community. So this is the first question which I decided to put out there is, what does winning mean when it comes to winning the AI race? And we'll start with you, Vivek. You were traveling recently, you were in South Korea, and you have a global perspective, obviously, with Dell's investments. So how do you define winning when it comes to winning the AI race?
Yeah, Dilawar, hey, thank you for having me here at this forum. This is really exciting. I think, not to rain on the topic of this parade, if you will, I think winning the AI race, I think, is kind of a misnomer in my particular view, because it implies there's a fixed finish line. It implies that whoever gets to that first gets a gold medal, and then there's a silver and bronze and something else. And this, by the way, comes up in all my travel, including in Korea. And the way I always like to think about it is not quite an infinite game, but it has multiple rounds. So the winning an AI race really comes down to what is the objective that a country or a business is trying to achieve with AI, and then how do they marshal the resources around it to be able to achieve that objective, which recognizes two things: the strengths they have and the constraints they're operating under. And I know we'll talk about energy at some point. To me, that's what winning really means. It's a multi-round game, and the difference in the AI race is that each successive round is not linear. It's not like a 4x100 relay. In my view, each successive round accumulates, and it's an exponential accumulation of benefits you accrue. And I think that's really the mindset we need to take, and I think that's really the mindset most countries need to take.
So I appreciate your reframing this. So let me ask you, follow up on that. In this first relay, if you will, how would you define the winning for the US?
Look, I think, and I make the same points when I travel, and I think the same thing applies for the US as well. When you think about it, there are, excuse me, there are a certain set of requirements or must-haves to win this, the first round. The first is you've got to define a clear objective. What is the objective you're trying to achieve in the first round? The second, you've got to make sure that the basic ingredients are in place. And what are those basic ingredients? They are the infrastructure, because without compute, you cannot do AI. There's the energy to feed that infrastructure. And then there's the data that needs to go into that infrastructure to be able to derive the right insights, all supported by talent and policy, which achieves the objective, and also recognizing that part of the strength is leveraging the public-private partnership. So to me, for the US, it comes down to what is the objective at this particular point? We're at a unique point. We've got 70% of overall flops or compute intensity of the whole world at our disposal. We've got leading talent. We've got models, both open and closed. We've got data. We've got a lot of assets to play with. So that's what I think the round one.
So infrastructure, compute, making sure that we still have a lead on talent and so forth. That's what I consider as almost.
And energy. Let's not forget energy.
Energy, of course.
Let's not forget energy.
Bakari, I'll come to you next. So, interesting thing about Bakari's role is that obviously you are with one of the big techs, but you're championing startups. And in my past life, I had the opportunity to work with Microsoft startup. It was a great partner. And as someone who's been an entrepreneur, one of the things that my last company was an AI company before I joined the Biden administration. One of the things we often think about this is that in the world of AI, there is concentration when it comes to the role of big tech companies, just the nature of the technologies, such access to data and so forth. So from the vantage point of startups that you are championing every day in your job, how do you see us retaining our entrepreneurship muscle? Because we know that the next Microsoft, the next Dell, the next SparkCognition is going to be a startup that we haven't heard of today. And in the world of AI, how do we ensure that we actually maintain that principle?
That's an excellent question. And just by way of introduction, Bakari here, I lead ecosystem partnerships for Microsoft for startups. And so the question being, in essence, what are we seeing with regards to startups and broader sort of, the race for infrastructure, excuse me. Do you mind prompting?
Absolutely. The question is how do you see startup community? Where obviously you need resources, you need access to data, major dollars for NVIDIA GPUs, just being able to even compete in this world of AI.
Yes. So at the highest level, some of the smartest folks I've ever met in my career are operating at the startup level. And I think behind the scenes, there are what we call hyperscalers like Microsoft, or AWS, and others. And I do think that the edge that we have, at least domestically, is with regards to the resources that all of these hyperscalers that come to bear. And the way that, say, the next startup and then the next competitor kind of, I wouldn't necessarily say unseats, but adds a ton of value in the AI race is actually not just by toppling, say, a hyperscaler like Microsoft, but truly partnering with and using sort of the pre-existing infrastructure. So I'll give you, a couple examples, or at least one example. So some of the hottest kind of cybersecurity startups, Wiz being a recent example, based in Tel Aviv, they're going on to do great things, Silverfort as well. And those technologies are super critical because I think one of, maybe it's not the first race, but the second race for sure is going to be non-state actors, doing, in essence, bad things with AI. And as advanced as AI is today, there are some critical gaps in exactly how we protect our systems and infrastructure. And I think that that's going to also be sort of the next horizon where there will be sort of tension, both domestic and abroad.
So you believe that there are, in certain sector or certain segments of tech, the startup community, can punch, if you will, at its weight.
Absolutely.
And working with hyperscalers. By the way, that's a term we use, and want to make sure everyone is familiar with that. Do you mind defining hyperscaler?
Sure. Hyperscaler is a large enterprise that provides services in the cloud, so versus, say, on-prem or on-premises, but provides, in essence, free storage and compute and other capabilities sort of virtually, and sells those services to businesses and people.
And this would be obviously Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Oracle now, as you know, recently it's been an incredible turnaround in terms of Oracle's market cap. Thank you, Bakari. We'll move to Amir, going back to winning or how we framed. There are stages of this. What's your perspective?
My perspective is that, you see, AI is not only an infinite race, it's also not a zero-sum game. The problem is that the current discussion around technology has been around technology as islands, the China ecosystem and the US ecosystem. And that creates this natural push to differentiate and defeat the other. Any advantage I have the ability to use this advantage against you. And my submission to you is that in having now traveled the world and spoken to a lot of people, seen how companies have reacted to this message, which has been out for 10 plus years, that this is the wrong path to pursue. And I think instead, the correct path to pursue is one of interdependence. In other words, a shared security model. Not everyone here might like it because politically it has implications, but that is the best in the long term to achieve a security posture that is tenable both for us and others in this world that have a tremendous capability. So what I would say then is that winning is not a question that I'd like to answer in the context of, the pie is finite and let me see how quickly I can eat all the pie slices. For me, it's really about figuring out how we can collaborate to build larger pies, so to speak, and create such dependency across that whole collection of companies that's delivering value that it becomes very difficult to disentangle, and in fact, it becomes detrimental to disentangle. We, in this country, had that belief not too long ago. And then we decided that we would change that belief. So what happened? Just like any hypothesis, we said, let's ban this from China, let's ban that from China, let's tax this from China. And the Chinese basically step by step showed that they had the capacity to overcome. Now, smart people learn from data. So the last few years have shown us that the data that we have in front of us argues that if we continue down this path, not only will we lose the relative advantage that we started with, but we will goad our competitor into accelerating beyond our fundamental capability as a country of 320 million versus a country of 1.4 billion, which is becoming more and more advanced. Therefore, I think that the competition needs to be rethought in a way that is more integrative rather than my security at your cost and my advantage at your detriment. That's how I see it.
And I appreciate that. In fact, with my professor we have had this debate with both my McCombs and LBJ class, is this whole model that both parties have adopted. And it transcends administrations now, it transcends political parties now when it comes to export controls on NVIDIA chips and so forth. And we're losing at some point, to your point, even access to what's happening. And the recent, I'm sure we all track what happened with DeepSeek. Despite all the controls that we had in place, innovation found its way. And folks were able to build, these models at a fraction of a cost. So picking on what Amir just said, just on the next win, I would say that let me ask your perspective. Do you think that the tools we use in our industrial policy, which is export control in this case, is that a failure, or would you rethink, or do you see a place where we could have some restriction to certain U.S. tech that enables a competitor? So let me have you respond to this before I go to Bakari.
My practical experience with some of the largest U.S. exporters, who I can't name, it wouldn't be proper, but having been with them in international deals in other parts of the world, they often tell us, these are all American companies, they often tell us that the practical value of, in certain instances, things like ITAR, which you are familiar with as a policy, export controls, certifications, etc., that there is a greater equivalent functionality available from a competitor. And the American company that's trying to sell in the same region is spending 6 months, 9 months, 12 months trying to get over policy barriers that their competitors don't face. Now, if that was done so that whoever the buyer is could never get that functionality, it would stand to reason, right? If you thought that you were the only person in the world that could supply that, you stop it, they'll never get it. That would make sense. But if that's not the case, and they tell me it's not the case, I've been in meetings where I can see it's not the case, then what's happening is that American companies are losing capital. and American competitors are gaining capital. And that capital is being reinvested in developing the next generation of whatever product, computer, aircraft, engine, sixth generation fighter, quantum technology, whatever that happens to be. And we're basically sitting here twiddling our thumbs. So to me, I think if we say that we want to do things that are true to our values, and many people would say, well, capitalism is sort of part of our value structure and has been for a long time. Even capitalist thinking would dictate that you would optimize, if you can't deal with the fundamental issue, which is pure denial, you can't do that. If that's gone, then the only other thing to do is to run faster. In order to run faster, you need capital. Why are you losing your capital to others? So even practically, it doesn't make sense.
Vivek, what's your perspective? Obviously, you're involved with infrastructure. Do you think we're leaving money on the table? Do you think it defies our values? And I also want to come back to, since you talk about cybersecurity, the real issues with some of the Chinese investments is about surveillance. There are clear human rights issues in China when it comes to the community. But we'll get your thoughts on it first.
Well, yeah, I think. Look, in the anchor point to winning the first round, if you will, has to be innovation. And I'll go back to the point I was making earlier. At the heart of it, when you think about strategic objective, a strategy is all about how do you leverage your strengths to achieve the objective within the constraints you have. So, and emphasizing a little bit what Amir said, let's take a look at the infrastructure layer. One of the research reports 6 months ago had published a report which looked at NVL72, GB200 at that time, which is the NVIDIA rack, versus a cluster max from Huawei, which had their own Ascent set of processors in it. When you look at it, it consumed 3.8 times the power. The cluster max consumed 3.8 times the power of the NVL72. But it only produced 1.9 times the flops or compute intensity. So on a flop per watt basis, if you will, the NVIDIA was clearly 2.3 times more efficient, or factor 2.3 more efficient. But China is fundamentally operating in an environment where energy is not a constraint. Right? They've added 8 times as much energy that they started with in the year 2000. Now they have twice as much of energy generation capacity the United States does. That changes the whole equation. And I think this is where I agree with Amir, which is, I think at the heart of it, this is about focusing much more on innovation rather than thinking through how do you slow somebody else down, because necessity is the mother of invention. Within Dell, 2.5 years ago, looking at how fast this was changing, we implemented something we call an AI radar, where we monitored 15 different battlegrounds, if you will, in this space. And we fully expected, and we in fact said internally, we said, look, there will be a lot of innovation that comes out of places like China, which are constrained on other elements. We were not surprised with DeepSeek. The rest of the world was. We were not surprised because it's an example of necessity is the mother of invention. So we've got to put much more of a focus on innovation, setting the policies around it, setting the structures around it. That's how you win round one of this race.
And that sort of, again, goes to you because you're wearing the innovation hat with the next generation of innovators from a startup community. I'll sort of double down on the question I had earlier, and if you could share the examples of how do you make sure, again, these startups are able to enable, right? Given when you and I were preparing this, Carter's report came that early stage funding is at its lowest for first-time founders, because as I'm sure those of you who track Silicon Valley, the seed rounds are now billions of dollars, and unless you are a famous CTO of a large AI company, you're out of luck. And most VCs are going after folks who already come from the community. And so I think if we were to out-innovate ourselves, how do we do this? So your perspective on that.
Yeah, so I think going back to the framework of sort of this first context, the thing that strikes me and where I think we can, let's call it, get out of our own way, is if you think about how agents work. So AI agents, basically, you as a consumer tell the thing to do a thing. So you can open up sort of Copilot or ChatGPT and you ask a question and the agent responds, or the agent takes an action. One layer sort of above that, overarching MCP, is sort of a orchestration layer in which a thing can control multiple agents doing things in coordination. Now, today that might sound like, oh, that makes sense. It's pretty simple. Like, I can open up my app and I say, book me a flight, right? But book me a flight might require access to my financial information, access to my personal information, access to my preferences, access to my family's information if I'm booking across the entire family, and also the travel availability. And that is siloed in different data repositories and warehouses. I think one of the ways that we empower startups, and also through policy here, will be how do all of these apps talk together in a compliant and safe way? And then how do we make sure that, and even on the enterprise side, for those tracking, it's kind of sort of wonky news, but companies like Salesforce and others are now allowing agents to access enterprise data. So it is slowly moving that way. But if you think about basic functionality like book me a flight, there is not an agent today that can do this in a safe way that protects your information or that can't be defeated by a non-state actor. So going back to the cybersecurity point as well, the way that we enable startups is through policy, allowing these technologies to speak with each other, and then ensuring that we do win, I think unequivocally, the race on cybersecurity.
So you bring up an interesting point, and for everyone, when you shared that example, that was brilliant, that when you look at all of us, sign an agreement, we don't read this whenever we sign up for a new app, but that's always one app. And if we are in the world of AI agents, they are working off of so many systems and apps. There is no overarching policy that comes to us. There's no regulation. And if that's the world we're going in, if AI is helping us get our work done every day, or as consumers helping us, as parents helping us, we don't even have a paradigm in that regard. So it brings up a question of regulation, which leads to my next question, which is around President Trump's AI action plan. And just for a little bit of backdrop on this, when I was in the administration with President Biden, he signed the first ever executive order in our history on AI, because obviously AI just came around in public consciousness in the last 5 to 10 years. And a lot of the focus in the Biden administration was about guardrails. It was an overarching theme that thou shalt do no harm with this. And around, as you may recall, those of you in the industry, that we actually came up with ways to have some of the tech companies submit their models to Commerce Department to see if there's a bias or there is a potential for things that might have an unintended consequence. So a lot more on guardrails. If I were to sum up, President Trump's AI action plan is much more aggressive. It's around infrastructure investments. Part of it is just where we are in this moment, and it's building on what I think anyone would have done in this moment. But he's clearly been very aggressive in Stargate, a big public-private partnership that involves OpenAI and SoftBank and Oracle, Larry Ellison of the world. So I want to get your thoughts on, starting with you, representing Dell. What's your worldview, or what's your view rather, on the president's AI action plan? What are you excited about? And what would you like to see more?
Look, I think I'm excited about the fact that the shift is more towards the innovation side of it. The shift is more towards the infrastructure spending part of it, which is necessary. I'm also excited about the fact that I think there's a recognition that there needs to be a public-private partnership. You cited some examples, but there are other examples, which is really how this thing will come together because of the disparate skills that everybody brings and the capital requirements for this. I'm also excited about the generally regulatory approach to it too. For example, Sandbox, which is Senator Cruz had put forward, which gives companies a way when these regulations are getting in their way in terms of innovating and moving fast. It gives them a way to at least go through it in a faster way. So there's a lot of things to be really, really excited about over here. I think, like with anything, I think speed matters. When I look at all these still disparate regulations coming through, I frequently cite, no matter whether you're a startup or a multinational company, you're operating in a global construct. So when you have to deal with local, state, federal, and international laws, and it's obviously a fool's errand to make sure that they all come together in a harmonious way. So all the companies have to figure out how to work within that. And I think that's something that the administration is continuing to work toward. But I'm really excited about the focus on innovation and at least moving faster in the space.
Amir, your perspective? Dilawar, I'm a little bit skeptical based on history. I'll give you one example. So, a little while ago, some years ago, there was this initiative in the Defense Department where they realized that they needed to engage with startups to get the best technology, and the government ought to get that technology. Then they decided that, they don't really have an acquisitions infrastructure to support that kind of small company engagement. So they created several organizations, which I won't name, but 2 or 3 organizations which were designed to bring startups on board. It's been about 8-10 years, and even now you'll find constant issues with acquisition. So I remember a conversation with the NATO Secretary General. He asked me, he said, you were critical of the US acquisition timelines. You know that NATO is far behind. So I said, Secretary General, the problem is that you told me in this conversation that you will decide in 5 years and buy in 10 years. And in that 5 years, I will have 20 generations of AI and probably another 50 in the last 5 years. So your requirements for 70 generation old AI, I don't know how anybody will be able to deliver. What I'm trying to say is the speed of bureaucracy and the speed of technology, number one, are completely disparate. And this is creating very major problems. This is what is preventing the US government from even having in the military laptops that work. There's a huge campaign. There's actually these, what do you call these, hashtags? So they have like a whole hashtag deal going on in the US military that says, don't give me AI, just give me like something better than Microsoft Windows 2000, right? This is the reality. So there is a very big disconnect of speed. I'm telling you news from the trenches. Now, when you set a policy, you have a vision. You then break that down into a set of policies. You have execution. Hopefully you have measurement. The words that you hear from every leader are wonderful. The policies, some seem okay, some seem a little fishy, but okay, there's enough there. The execution is being done by people who have no ownership. What do I mean by that? In the military, the average senior officer sits in a chair for 2 to 3 years. Then when he goes or she goes, the next guy comes in and has no ownership to the past project. So technology implementation of the kinds that we need to do to build our country is not aligned with the HR practices, with the promotion practices, with the way in which the fundamental organizations run. Now, this is not me just saying it. This is me after 20 years of having hundreds of conversations telling you what that institution now says publicly. These are problems. So I would be far more inclined to believe people that bring these types of issues up and say, this is how we're going to solve what was failing. Because I never discount a politician's ability to paint a beautiful vision. That's not the part that I worry about. What I worry about is how that vision gets executed and sustained over multiple years. And unfortunately, we've had fits and starts, but no execution. And I'll just stop there. But if you ask me for 10 examples, I would quote 10 examples, right?
You and I could have a debate on this for some time. And let me just give you one story just to share with the audience as you were sharing this. I hear you, by the way, having worked in government, and I'm an entrepreneur who was also very impatient when I was in the bureaucracy. But one way I rationalized the speed of government was, one, just the sheer scale is huge. Second, we actually have guardrails, and something that, by the way, we must maintain, and that's something we cannot back away from. However, even when despite that speed, the impact scale is so huge. And if you get a policy going in a certain way, it can lead to pretty unfair, in a good way, outcomes. So I'll give you one example. When I was at the State Department, one of my first visits was to Gulf countries. And this is at the time you may recall President Biden as a candidate had been very critical of MBS. And they invited me to come and speak at an entrepreneurship event. I was an official, and I was talking to the White House and saying, should I go? And I cannot say more, but they said, you can make the call as a special envoy. And I did go there. And one of the things that I noticed in the kingdom was, and this is incredible how this doesn't sound like 20 years ago, this happened only 5 years ago. There was a clamor for US to show up and US tech companies to show up and be part of what the kingdom is doing into reimagining the economy. And our view was, including Microsoft and others, was that we will not play. And we did not play. So I have obviously policy differences with President Trump, but the reality is he's unlocked when it comes to engagement with Gulf in Saudi Arabia. And that's an example of a policy position that changed. It is whether or not we see those dollars coming in, how quickly they impact products. But there's a policy view under this administration that we will encourage investments. And they're being prioritized, sometimes over concerns for human rights. And we can always have a debate on that, whether that's a good thing or not. But it's a real example where a president's policy or a view or a position is directly impacting incoming foreign investment. And it was at record level before, it's gone to the next record level as these billions you're talking about. But your point is well taken that there is a speed issue here, especially when it comes to procurement. So since we mentioned some of the inbound investment, do you have any thoughts on the AI action plan? Obviously, Microsoft is a player, you're an investor in OpenAI. How do you see the plan or anything that you would like to see more?
So fundamentally, Microsoft is investing sort of along the 3 pillars of the action plan. And so I can say, just in essence, look around you, look north, look west of here, all throughout Texas and Oklahoma. There are data centers being built by various companies. I also think that Microsoft's done an excellent job in some of the most recent releases of software, not Windows 2000, though I was an expert in ensuring that there's over 11,000 different models, many of which or some of which are open source models for AI development. So that being a subset of another pillar, investing in open source technology, I think is critical. And lastly, we're also investing in sort of broader education and skilling of the workforce. And those things are super exciting. I remember speaking with the professor here on a Monday, not too long ago, when we were talking about this question specifically. And so what I can say on a personal level, what I didn't appreciate is having to call over that weekend a number of the members of my organization, my team that I lead, and making sure that they came back to the States if they're traveling abroad immediately. And so I think that it's a double-edged sword to some extent on the preparedness that we're undertaking, and then some of the other policy artifacts that are our lived experience, our reality, to adjust and adapt forward.
So I'll pick this up, and promise we didn't work this flow. It's working nicely here. You mentioned H-1B visa issues. You spent the last weekend making sure. It's hard to track. I hate it. Making sure that your team members could come back in the country. Okay. I mean, you think about at a human level, and at a team level, as a leader level, and how many of us have team members and colleagues, it takes a toll on you. Yeah. To step back, I think we all can agree that talent is key. One of the reasons we've succeeded as a country, across history, not just on the tech side, is because we've been a nation of immigrants. You can just look around this room, you can look at the stage. And I actually think that's our single most unique and most sustainable competitive advantage. Everybody else could throw the money and could do the compute and could figure out the electricity issues. But it is the fact that we have successfully, over the course of our history, built upon waves of immigration from every background, every part of the world. And that's why we are where we are. And for the first time, I think it's fair to say that ideal is being questioned, if it's sustainable in this environment. I was traveling before I joined the UT. I was abroad, and I met a number of students who were admitted to the United States, top universities. And it broke my heart when they asked me a question that said, I'm not sure if we feel welcome. Some of the top talent. So when we look at US competitiveness, going back to the topic, to be very capitalist here, without talent, we can't succeed. We know China has a deliberate strategy as a part of their plan, long-term plan, to train X million number of AI and ML engineers and data scientists. So thank you for bringing this up. So Bakari, let me actually ask you. You're obviously a major employer. If you look at the top 10, even just H-1B skill visa holder, one of the companies that hires the most number. How do you think about talent? How do you think about making sure, given this pain that we are going through in terms of immigration issue, being able to attract talent, also being able to make sure that American workers can be reskilled. Because without that, we can't really win this race on AI, or even the first round, as Vivek so aptly put it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so Microsoft recently announced, our President Brad Smith, a $2 billion investment in sort of K through 12, ensuring that there is learning and skilling for the next generation of Americans that will hopefully be the future engineers and business folks. So I think that's a baseline, and other hyperscalers, just to be fair, have undertaken similar initiatives or other ones, often at the university level as well. I think when you take a step back and you're thinking about talent and talent development, having sort of gaps not being able to be filled by those coming from other areas is going to be a challenge if that's kind of the way it goes. One of the things that I also do at Microsoft broadly, Microsoft for Startups, is I lead a team that continues to support underrepresented founders and female founders outside the U.S. And part of that thinking and mission is that talent is distributed relatively equally across the world. It's opportunity that is not. And so in doing sort of the things that we're trying to do, we're trying to, and by we I mean Microsoft, we're trying to upskill folks in places like Tulsa, I mentioned before, like the investment in the ION Center in Houston, with thousands of citizens of Houston being employed at no cost by Microsoft for jobs that aren't necessarily high tech, right? They are entry level or higher, but those are the I think let's call them seeds that are planted and that other enterprise organizations plant so that we can remain competitive. But again, I think that there's, on a personal level, a lot more we can do. I'm hearing in my own sort of community, there might be an elementary school public elementary school being closed, right? And so, how do we think about not just sort of on a global scale with this talent development, but in our own backyard? Like, how do we interdict, if necessary, but influence the next crop of workers?
Thank you, Amir.
Dilawar, there's two parts to this. I think one is the H-1B issue. So having talent come from outside the US and come enrich the country, I don't think anybody would oppose this concept. It's a compelling concept. The practical implementation of that is that 71% of those H-1B visa holders end up coming from only one country. So politically, it becomes a very easy target. When you find, maybe the principle of the thing is correct, but when the implementation of the thing is weak and presents a target in a political environment, it will be targeted. So that's one element. It's just a truth. It's not a good or a bad. It is that is what's happening. But the flip of that is another element, which is that, and I've been thinking about this for many years. I've even asked a lot of kids at UT and other places, why is it, by the way, who remembers Tom Swift? Do you guys remember Tom Swift? Tom Swift, okay. Who else? Tom Swift, like 3 Tom Swifts. Okay. How about Popular Mechanics and Boy Mechanic? How many people remember? Okay, well, there's a few more, all right. And let's see, how many people maybe remember Byte magazine? That's the last one that I remember. Okay, Byte magazine. Okay, now this is, before I moved to America at the age of 17, 18, my view was Archie magazine with Archie fixing up his jalopy, and every garage basically being full of tools and people working on their cars regularly. And the Boy Mechanic, where boys could or girls could make whatever they wanted. And actually, I got one of those and I made a bow and I made a small go-kart out of the plans of that Boy Mechanic. And Popular Mechanics was like the stuff that you as a kid couldn't make, but damn it, that was really cool stuff. One day you got to make it. So It was a culture that was not just put out in magazines, but you literally on a Saturday or a Sunday, 30 years ago, you could go through middle-class neighborhoods, and when you open the garage, none of those guys have room for a car in the garage. It's all tools, and they're doing things. Now that has declined, and working with your hands has declined, and the need to build things with your hands has declined. That's where base level ingenuity comes from. You know, Bill Boeing was a woodworker. That's what the Boeing company came out of. The Wright brothers were bicycle mechanics. So none of these guys were, rocket scientists to begin with. Now, why has that gone away? So that's a non-H-1B issue, right? When I was at UT at the computer science school in '99, I think there was about 2,500 kids. After I left, because the dot-com crash happened, you remember that horrid crash? The kids just immediately left the department. And for a long time, it was around 800, 850 from 2,500. So what that told me was that these kids are in computer science because they think they're going to get a high salary. The only thing that changed, nothing in computer science changed, right? I mean, Turing said what he said, and Dijkstra said what he said about GoTo. Nothing changed. So what actually changed? The fact that you put a lower rate at you making money by doing computer science. That's a cultural and dare I say, moral issue, which we need to confront. It's not so much H-1B versus us and white versus another color. It really isn't. It's really everybody, locus of control, taking responsibility for themselves. Am I willing to do the hard thing when things get hard? Am I willing to stick with the hard subject that I love, even though CNBC is telling me that it's going to be tough to get a good job for 2 years? Will I stick to it? Or will I just go off and, I don't know, become,
So from a public policy standpoint, coming back to that, how do you affect that? And I'll come back to you. I also want to know about what's in your garage. I'm very curious. I have to zip go and figure out what's in your garage.
The robots will welcome you.
So let me ask you, also a major employer, clearly, and again, it's not just about H-1B, talent broadly speaking. H-1B obviously is a trigger at this moment, immigration debate overall, but what's your perspective?
Look, I think talent is a big part of one of the factors I mentioned right at the onset. Talent is a big deal and a big part of it. Now, talent resides at multiple levels, right? At a very microeconomic level, it resides within companies, right? So I think you talk about it in terms of what you're doing. And so similarly, like our focus very parochially is to make sure our talent pool is upskilled in this dimension. But then when you think about the talent factory in any country, in any economy, it is really the schools. It starts with K through 12 education. So there's got to be a focus on that. And I think this is where I was talking about the public-private partnership piece of it. So for example, if Dell, we're stepping into it and offering Dell Tech Crew program for K through 12 to make sure that that skilling happens. It happens at the university level. And again, that's how the universities and folks like you educate the students, and then private companies like ours have a role to play too. So we have something like Develop with Dell program, particularly aimed at the undergraduates, if you will. And then beyond that, it comes down to how do you draw in the others, if you will, from other talent pools that you have. Now, this topic comes up pretty much anywhere I go in the world, the talent piece of it. And I'm an optimist because I think some of the agentic technology we've talked about, 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, if you needed to be a software coder, you had to go to undergrad in computer science. Maybe you need to do a master's in computer science. Now you don't really need to. You can vibe code your way in. You could argue that community colleges have a big role to play. So I think those are the types of policy discussions that we need to have as a country to make sure how do we unlock the potential of the entire talent pool out there. Because with these tools, the barriers to AI skillings are lowered down. And now it's a matter of how do you put the right policy in place with the right public-private partnership to really unlock them.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to open it up for Q&A. I just want to make one comment about H-1B. this policy was put in place pretty much, if you will, when the internet was invented. It has not been reformed in 30 plus years. The world is a very different place, the tech is a very different place, and my perspective from my computer science class is there was a disproportionate number of international students from India, and from China, and from Pakistan, and from Taiwan. And those are the folks who fed, if you will, the skilled H-1B. So there is absolutely room to improve any policy that has been put together, rushed to respond to a breakthrough tech after 30 years. But it's how we do it. Since we're talking about public policies, one of the things that we grapple is how do you reform something? And I think we all could agree things could be reformed, but it's how we do it. And whether they're disruptive, whether they're constructive. There's clearly abuse of H-1B, absolutely. But also has been integral to many our industries and so forth. So with that, we're going to open up for Q&A, and this is your chance to probe questions. If you could just say your name and your affiliation, if you're at UT, which school you are, if you're outside UT, who are you with? And I'll try to keep track with you, sir. Yes.
My name is Joel Granoff, and my affiliation to UT is my son. There's a graduate of UT. And I appreciate the panel. It's a great conversation. Interesting. I like the reframing about, this isn't really about winning, but if it's winning, it's round one, round two, and looking at this with global interdependencies needs. By the same token, I quickly searched. I came up with 10 states that have already passed kind of U.S. domestic, let's call it sovereign AI policy. California, Colorado, this is something that's. So when I think about this global ecosystem, one of the things that concerns me is the noise at the state level. And what happens, Microsoft ecosystem companies that are like, oh my God, well, in California, we can't do this, but in Illinois, maybe we can. Anyway, I'm really curious what the panel thinks about US state level legislators taking on AI policy, which is also encouraged by this current administration.
Right. Just one thought on that. There is a sort of a framing that the Trump administration actually has saying, look, we will supersede state level regulation of AI. Yeah. So I would just offer that. But I'd love to get your perspective. I'd love to get your perspective on how do you look at states and how do we rationalize. Do you want to go first?
Look, I think as I mentioned along the way, I think each company, no matter whether it's as big as Dell or a small company, a startup, is operating in a global context, and it's dealing with local, state, national, and international constraints and laws around it. And it is obviously not conducive to driving the growth over there. I don't really have a good answer, because this is one of those issues, particularly in the United States, which is a system of government which has these flexibilities and freedom built in as a part of the construct. I don't really have a good answer, except it is an issue, and at least what I am encouraged by is, at least as we talk and as I talk to folks at the state level as well as at the federal level, everybody understands it and everybody understands it's an issue. So I hope at some point we will all grapple with it and come up with a homogenized framework which provides more certainty and less cost to adhering to these policies.
I mean, do you have a quick thought on Texas as a state, since you spend quite a bit of time locally?
The quick thought is a very Texas-like thought because it's highly practical, which is that when stuff like this happens, companies just basically look at this and say, okay, what's my max risk, right? I need to do this. I'm distributing all of this. I'm going to violate this policy. What does that cost me? Like $100K, right? In the meanwhile, how long can I go and work on this and rationalize this and make people see sense? And you see this happening all the time. All these things where somebody got slapped with a judgment and they've got to give $200K or $1 million or $3 million. These are all calculated risks, and in a very complex framework of laws like this, which, as you correctly point out, at the state level might contravene federal level laws. It sort of becomes a four-dimensional kind of where do I pay my dues and optimize the dues being lowest and my business efficacy being maximized. So I think most civilians look at that as, well, I can't do it, right? Because I mean, the government says don't do it, so I can't do it. But if you're a braver civilian, you look at that, you say, okay, well, what if I do it? What's the downside? And a lot of times corporations have enough lawyers to do that. So I think there's, all sorts of ways you can take to deal with that.
All right, thank you. I'm going to take quite a few hands. I think I saw your hand next to them.
Hi, I'm Nadeem Malik, and my whole family is Longhorn. Both kids and my wife were too.
Welcome.
Okay. And I also taught here, right? So question, I think, Dilawar, you talked about the students, right? And Vivek, you mentioned about the talent, and we are talking about H-1B. But I think one thing we have not discussed is that if you look at the current AI capabilities that we have built up, they're based upon a set of 8 people who wrote the paper, right, about 2017. Attention is all we need, or all you need. And 6 of those 8 people were born outside of the US, right? They were not H-1B. They came to universities like this. This is where they studied. And then after 6-7 years, they were able to come up with that new innovation. So now the question is, what policies do we really need to institute now so that we actually win the 3rd, 4th race, as Vic had mentioned, because technology is moving at a very fast rate. I don't think we are at a stage where we can actually sit on our laurels and say, this is what it is, right? We have enough brain trust in this country now, and we can just basically continue on. As it happened with, let's say, with the atomic bomb, right? We were able to bring the people in, they built the bomb, and we were able to continue for a very long time. So any thoughts on that and any historical perspective? I know, Amir, you have been very much into the history based upon what you mentioned. So some...
Thank you, Nadeem, for the question. It's a sort of unfair question to our business leaders, and we are sitting in the university talking about how do we continue to attract the world's best to our universities. But I would love to hear your response. Whoever wants to go first? Bakari, do you want to volunteer?
I'm not a policy expert, so for me, it's a little difficult to formulate sort of a direct response. But I will say, though, as part of it, just kind of building on the comments made before, if you are a high net worth individual, yes, of course, you can pay sort of the tall fence tax, right, every day and not change and not adapt towards your local rules and regs, if you're leaving this question. So I do think policy, it has to be put in place where you can reasonably expect a certain set of outcomes that don't tax you, overly much for violating it, or if you do so, that it's severe enough to impact even large multinationals at the same time. And then we'll see, in essence, like how startups who don't necessarily have the millions of dollars, at their fingertips to deploy, like how they vote with their feet. Will startups, take their business from Delaware and incorporate in Nevada? Will investors, avoid California? So far, the answer is no, but it is possible.
So, how do we bring the next researcher?
Yeah, so I think, Nadeem, sorry. Your question is that if we don't have as many H1s coming in, many foreigners were the ones that contributed to that seminal paper. What about the next such seminal paper if we're going to prevent people from coming in, right? How do we see competition and competitiveness evolve? Is that the crisis?
No, more towards the academics, right? Because many of these kids became the authors of that paper were actually students.
Yes.
They were not H-1Bs.
Yeah. So even F1. But overall, there seems to be this vibe that immigration will be curbed of all sorts, right? So I think the point is that if you turn that spigot real tight and there's very little coming through, what happens? Well, somebody that would be defending that position would say, look, all of China's artificial intelligence work is free. They give away all the papers. They give away all their model advancements. So why do you gotta have the student come up over here? Right? All the papers are on archive. We can email them. They're happy to collaborate with us. And they give their work to us for free. So depending on where you are, you might come up with a different answer. But what I'll tell you is that not enough water has gone under the bridge. We don't quite know how these things will work out because this is by nature a highly complex, multivariate type problem. There's individual people and what they'll do. There'll be special cases. There'll be some knowledge coming in from the outside. The government will relax some of these things. There'll be digital means for innovation to seep through the ecosystem. So all of that rationalized again, does that become a stable system for innovation? And it would be very hard to predict the future of such a system. You can try to do things that increase the odds. Of course, bringing in smart people now and increasing that would increase the odds. Maybe reducing the $100,000 to $10,000 if you're a PhD. Maybe those things would reduce the odds. But I think that this is such a multivariate, complex thing, it'll take a couple of years before we even know what happened.
And Amir obviously is, I think, responding to, he's operating in the constraints that almost like fait accompli. I would say, if I were having served, this is where the business community needs to continue to advocate and say, look, if you want to make sure that we stay at the next edge, this is one of our competitive advantages. And that's how we've thrived. And if not research paper, could be another, could be inventions, could be something else. And I think this, and we know that this administration has, great connections with the tech leadership. And I'm sure Satya and Sundar and others, all of them are H-1B visa holders, right, are having this conversation at some point. And it's important to remind us, because that's how things happen. It is, I remember people come to us and tell us, and look, if you have an ear of the president, and especially this president, it makes a difference. There were a number of questions. Go ahead.
Sorry, let me one quick point. I think you made a pretty astute observation early on that this came into existence 30 years ago. I think it was 89 or 1990.
Right, roughly. Yeah.
But it haven't really been reformed since. And I was looking at it over the weekend. I was just looking at the facts because H-1B is consuming a lot of oxygen and air right now. The country has 85,000 new H-1Bs awarded every year. That's the cap. There's another category called the O1, which when I came here and I became a naturalized citizen, I went through the equivalent EB1 national interest waiver route. The country had 19,500 no cap granted for the O1 for extraordinary abilities visas. So there are all these mechanisms available. But I think, to your point, it has not been reformed. But I suspect that, and I think to your point, this will take a few innings to sort out. But there's lots of tools already.
You could have a dedicated session just on immigration. Let's see. I'm trying to. Would you like? I think there's something you had before as well. Okay. Mark, or first, and then we'll go. Go ahead. Yeah.
Ling Lin, I'm with the Bureau of Economics Geology for UT. So my question is, my team has been working a large load on the physical infrastructure. So the first person asked about, on the federal side of executive orders and how the state takes it. My question is kind of on the other side, that if the current administration is really focusing on AI and they talk about physical infrastructure, right now Texas is really pressed on a lot of building fast of infrastructure. Do you guys see any from the federal level, any push of the policy? Because, we work with the state a lot for our institute, but very curious since the executive order, what do you see, where is coming from, when?
Just to clarify, do you mean that the federal government is pushing?
Like what they are pushing from the federal side to
pushing
say,
Texas to move faster?
Not just in general, the infrastructure, the infrastructure, compute, the federal policy of that.
Yeah, like,
which is
on
part
the
of
physical
AI,
side, what they're pushing, like what area and the policy. I'm not a policy person. So
happy to offer that. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think data centers this year have had a greater investment than all of commercial real estate. For the first time in the history of this country, we're spending more on data centers this year than all of commercial real estate, which means that obviously the physical data center build-up and all the machines that are going in, the reason why everybody that holds NVIDIA stock and 2x NVIDIA ETFs and all of these things is happy these days is because a lot of NVIDIA GPUs are going straight into those huge, ginormous facilities. And you can actually track how fast this is happening with NVIDIA sales numbers. And to to a large extent. For example, Dell sells a lot of the machines that contain those GPUs. Dell's been doing tremendously well. Other companies have been doing tremendously well. So yes, I mean, it is a huge spend. And then some of the announcements that have been made recently, like the $100 billion deal, a company committing to $100 billion that doesn't have $100 billion, but they're going to figure out how to do a triangle and get $100 billion out of something. But my point is, these deals are happening, and obviously they are happening with the highest level encouragement. Highest level encouragement. You see those pictures in the Oval Office. Definitely, this is a policy that means a lot to the federal government.
And I'll just say that, to Amir's point, the president uses the bullet pulpit for this very effectively, right? Putting Zuckerberg on spot, was sitting next to him and saying, how much are you going to invest in? He said 700 billion. He wasn't ready to say that number. He was in a hot mic moment. So clearly, while the government is not putting its own money, it's using the bullet pulpit to help ensure money is coming in also from sovereign funds and others. There were a number of questions. I'm not, in the interest of time, make sure we get as many of you. Why don't we have you all just, if I may, take your question, and I'll see if there are any similarities and have the panel respond to them. So we'll go in that corner. If you could just stand up, because we can't unfortunately see you face from here. Thank you. If you could just state your name and your question, please.
My name is Grayson Slover. I'm a dual degree at the law school and the LBJ school. So I noticed, I guess, the theme of your discussion was you disagree with kind of the whole premise of the AI race, of there being an AI race with China. And
all of us or one of us? Or?
I'm sorry.
Well, I hear you. So you're saying that. So let me take your question,
Yeah.
and I'll try to summarize it and remember it. We'll respond to that.
Sure.
So your question is about how we framed the discussion.
Yeah. Well, I was just wondering. I think the term that you used was interdependence.
Yep.
And for like a collaborative framework,
Yep,
would
right.
be more productive than framework of a race. And I guess I was just wondering how you envision that working in practice. Like, do you think that that the Chinese Communist Party would be open to like allowing liberal norms to influence like the
Understood. So we'll take your question. So how does collaborative work? So thank you. We'll come back to responding. We'll just let me take other questions, and then I'll try to follow this thread in the room. You go next, ma'am, please.
I'm Phoenix. I'm a planning and policy student. I'm just curious about, talking about data centers, how do we kind of win the AI race while also making sure communities are happy with the data centers and that data centers are sustainable for the community that they're in?
Thank you. Thank you. And the question right behind you, please.
So my name is Carla Desagnac. I'm currently my first year at the McCombs School of Business. I'm doing my MBA. And my question is more of a historical one. So I'm wondering what you think the comparison is of AI compared to other revolutionary 20th century technologies, considering the airplane,
Fantastic.
The microchip,
I love it.
Even Wi-Fi, things
Yeah,
like that.
I love it.
And how AI compares to the effects that those technologies have, and also the implications, because I think AI is having a very unique impact on the environment, on societies, and so how that plays into the.
Thank you. As you can tell, Amir is very eager to respond to that. I got to take more questions than I remember. We'll go around on this side. You had your hand up before. Please go ahead, sir.
Hi, Sean Ball. I'm Executive Director of the Austin AI Alliance. My connection to UT is I was studying AI in 1984 at Computer Science School, along with the LBJ School and McCombs, though. So thank you very much. Great panel. I had maybe a potential additional take on winning the AI race and wanted to get your feedback on it. You know, maybe the winner is whoever manages this disruption most effectively, right? There will be winners and losers in the labor market. There will be people that will be displaced. There will be opportunities that arise, right? So vibe coding has presented opportunities for people, but simultaneously there's been junior developers who are struggling to get jobs. Lots of employment issues. Would love to get you guys' take on that.
Absolutely. That's actually my last question. So thank you for that. We'll go here. Asif, go ahead.
Asif Habib. I'm also Open President, Open Austin Chapter Organization for Pakistani Entrepreneur President. I was also Principal Architect in SparkCognition and imported from Silicon Valley. So my question is that when in London, we had horses. We had problem we built a mechanical horse to solve the problem of ship management in London. And that was the time of that time. People did not know that they will have a problem of 101 jam or 35 jam problem. I think we should build engineers to solve 101 of the future, leapfrog. And one more point, going back, is that when I started my own company after Spark, I started when deep machine learning was in. During my startup, digital generative AI was in, then agentic. So even entrepreneurs have to move fast. So how will government do?
Thank you, Hasan. There's one more. Do you want to go at the back, and then yourself, and then you, sir? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hello. My name is Husain. I work for one of those hyperscalers that you guys mentioned. From a policy perspective, we know that there's about maybe 10, 15 companies that are primarily the ones investing from an infrastructure perspective, the data centers, the equipment in them, the chips going in them. We've seen many evolutions of certain companies having dominance in a certain sector. Do you foresee the need for, and will it happen that we'll have some sort of antitrust regulation, competitive regulation in the AI space? We've seen a little bit of that in the tech/internet space, either by the FTC or by the European Commission. Will that be needed, and will that happen in the AI space as well over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Thank you, Farouk.
Going back to K-12 education, fear of failure seems to be one of the driving issues of not having innovation. Fear of failure, you have tens of billions of dollars sometimes to do this. What are some of the things to get over that type of attitude, especially with the youth?
And then we'll have you, sir, and then I'll try to summarize.
Jonathan. I'm a consultant in the innovation ecosystem here in Austin. We keep using the word infrastructure, and I think we're using it appropriately. Infrastructure is about resources, and you're talking about being the hyperscaler, being the chips. I would suggest we need to go more fundamental than that. We have a scarcity of potable water in this country. We have a scarcity of power. We have a scarcity of roads, of pipelines, and otherwise. And we can make all the ships we want, right? But if we don't build the infrastructure to transport them, power them, cool them, and provide the water for that cooling, we're building into nothingness. And I think it was a series of happenstance that had happened. That a lot of the things that you brought up about Popular Mechanics, I love that magazine. I love Omni as well. All of those. A lot of that came out of a generation beyond the New Deal, right? When we went and we invested in infrastructure that drove the next 60 years of innovation. And I'd just like to get your thoughts on, do we need a New Deal
100%
to build out the infrastructure that takes us 50 years?
Thank you. I'm going to try to now address these questions. You one panelist before Amir takes over. My role here completely, and I'm disrupted. So let me first start. There was a couple of threads here that were interesting. I think your question, and earlier someone asked a question about the effect on the environment, right? So the idea that we are power, 10% of our electricity will be consumed by AI in this country in the next 5 years. So when you look at this infrastructure, look at our effect on environment. We have two of the hyperscalers president. Do you mind, Dell, referring to Vivek on how do you respond to water, electricity, environment?
Well, I think it's a few comments. The world is consumed with large language model-centric thinking and training-centric thinking, which is where all these big, massive power numbers and data center numbers come from. The reality is, when you look at the pace of algorithmic innovation, the small language models and purpose-built language models continue to run at a breakneck pace. In fact, there was a paper just last week, I think, published by NVIDIA and I think Georgia Tech, which talked about how small language models fundamentally, because of economics and other reasons, will be the underpinnings of agentic technology. And why is that important? Because if that is true, which I believe it is, then it'll start offloading a lot of the assumptions we're making with these big data centers and power and cooling implications. It offloads it to devices like a PC. And if you think about it, a PC, which all of us carry in a phone, is the most cost and energy efficient place to orchestrate this workload. So I think these natural things will come into play and it'll balance some of it out. Is it going to balance it all the way out so the data centers don't consume, last year they consumed 400 terawatt hours. By the end of the decade, they're projected to consume 1,200 to 1,800 terawatt hours.
So you're optimistic. You think there is a
I am
way
optimistic.
when it comes to technology. Now, I mean, you were excited by a couple of questions. And let me just reframe, just repeat for the audience. And they were both had to do with, do we need a new deal, given these broad needs that we have when it comes to commodities, for lack of a better term. And also there was a question about, this technology that we say is very breakthrough, and I said this is what's most impactful in modern human history. What else comes to mind closely, and what can we learn from that? Do you want to respond to those?
Yeah. First of all, on the brain, 20 watts of power for AGI. In your head, my head, Vivek's head. And hopefully everyone's head. But it's 20 watts of power. So, we are burning, orders and orders of magnitude more power. So the point is there's an existence proof in nature of us being able to shrink that data center down into, cranial cavity. And we get there. Now, that's good news. That's optimism. The other part...
I like you being optimistic.
Yeah, I throw it in there. Throw people off. But, yeah, exactly. No. But I think that even what you do with these data centers, even the algorithms that you run, like we were talking earlier about, this type of neurosynaptic architectures and things that work very differently to this linear algebra style calculation that happens in big GPUs. So not to get too techie here, but there's fundamentally new ways of very low power computation which represent entirely different hardware architectures that are based on how actual neurons in the brain fire with a temporal measure to them, as opposed to just the linear computation of row over row over matrix over matrix over matrix. So, we're working on a company in that area, and I'm very bullish that that could yield. So my point is that these are all things that are kind of temporary to me. People get too worked up on it's going back to the London will drown in horse manure because the current technology requires X amount of power, but then we'll require 100 times more technology in another 10 years. So 100 times and 100 times, and let me hear you do the, oh my God, that's more power than we produce. Yeah, but what about Vivek coming up with a neurosynaptic system and it's 1,000x the power and we're all good. And so those are the investments. The smart investments. And I think there's a lot of ways to get them going. In America, we have, many, like Xerox PARC, Lincoln Labs, many labs at UT Austin. We have that model. It's just that people working in those environments don't need to feel threatened. They don't need to have their, planes, tickets, and backpacks checked 18 times coming in and going out, and they just need to, they need to feel like, they're ordinary people like the rest of us.
So both of you had great hope on this. This is good. We have one lawyer on the stage by trade. It's always good to have a lawyer on stage. One of the questions was antitrust. And I'm going to request you to respond to that. Do you see a moment or an opportunity where there might be, and I know you're with Microsoft, and but I also, if you don't mind, we also want to come back to, we had talked earlier about being collaborative with great powers. Are we being delusional in that respect? And I mean that respectfully. Like, is China ready to even play ball? But we'll come to that. But if you can respond to the antitrust piece.
I don't foresee, when it comes from the hyperscaler, and I'm speaking generically perspective, too much surface area in terms of antitrust, insofar as that, if you look at all of them, and I include Microsoft, especially in this, and I've also mentioned this in the opening earlier, that Microsoft itself is hosting 11,000 models for access, the vast majority of which are created by third parties outside of Microsoft's control, it positions itself much more like a utility for LLMs and other technologies, which I think is exactly where Microsoft and others, hyperscalers, should be. Right? So if you have an Anthropic, Perplexity, you name it, and they operate on Azure, and they operate on AWS's backend, on Bedrock, et cetera, that's okay. And I think that interoperability and that consumer choice will kind of stand up against potential consumer challenges or regulatory challenges. And to the second point on
that's a broader question for the panel, and then I'll end with one question that should be relevant to many folks in the audience. This question about, is there a possibility that can we imagine a more collaborative engagement with China when it comes to AI? Your thoughts?
I think it's important among academics and researchers that you build a foundation of trust. And if trust is there, then absolutely, yes, there will be partnerships. Microsoft is public, and Microsoft actually trades security information with all the other hyperscalers on purpose, in order to protect consumers and enterprise and government around the country, around the world. But there's approximately, I think, 17,000 now AI-based attacks every minute. And I think that we'll see in years from now malicious code in LLMs from potential developments, whether it's open source or from papers that were created by non-state actors, however, that were funded by some of the same entities that we're concerned about being partners with today. It's not a prediction, but it is a likely and probable outcome.
So you have to be very watchful.
So trust is the fundamental thing to do, and if you have that, then of course the collaboration will come. If there is a failure to do so, then I would be wary, and I don't think many of the hyperscalers would take those bets.
Amir, very briefly, your reaction. Xerox sued Apple. Apple sued Microsoft. Microsoft sued half a dozen companies. Even now, Qualcomm is in multiple lawsuits. This happens every day in the West, but it's never seen. And by the way, what are the charges? The charges are you stole my stuff. You took my guys that stole my stuff. You tried to replicate, you tried to steal my name. I mean, every kind of IP theft allegation. The largest IP theft cases are amongst US companies and European companies, not Chinese companies and American companies. But yet, we have dinner, the CEOs have dinner at the same event, they're quite fine. The case kind of works out in the background. 3 years later, there's a judgment. So is that not an example of how, in a complex business, you can have disconnects on some topics, and you can have partnerships on some topics, and the role of a big leader is to deal with multiple contradictory truths all at the same time and make progress. In the case of China, what we say is, some guy somewhere in the backwoods of Beijing took out his laptop and ran Nmap, and I was able to get 1,000 hits on my website, because that's what Nmap does on a laptop. These numbers sound very large, but like most students here that have used tools like that, you can generate 1 million attacks in an hour. So 1 million attacks in an hour, when I hear that, it doesn't scare me, because I'm like, okay, well, that's Nmap, and you ran it in 3 command lines on a laptop. So, okay. But that somehow requires us to have serious discussion as to how we will respond to the Chinese enemy when they hit us with cyber attacks. There are even serious papers and discussions. So let me ask you, but how do you collaborate, given that mistrust?
It's very simple. The thing is that for any of these things, CVMs are necessary. So I met with the head
of confidence-building measures.
I met with the head of the China organization that does their 5-year plans. I sat down and I asked him, I said, are you guys out to get us? What's the deal? And the guy said, you have no idea. I swear to God, the guy says, you have no idea. I have 1.5 billion people in this country. My number 1 problem, 2, 3, 4, 5 is all Chinese people. I've got to solve all these problems for all these people. Like my 119th issue is you. And if you had a country with 1.4 billion people, you would be telling me the same thing. So you keep saying, I'm going to come attack you and we're going to do this. And what am I doing? I guess I'm building a deterrent. You guys have 800 bases. How many do I have? I have like one little, pit stop at Djibouti. That's the only thing I have. How the heck am I going to take you on globally? They have these conversations really openly and brutally. So this is a responsible guy who literally, in his office.
So you believe it's a matter of trusting, and obviously things get politicized, right? And by both parties, and often China is a boogeyman. So I'm going to have you address this, and then we'll wrap up with a final question, which should be, I think, of importance to everyone who is a student here on campus. To your thoughts on this.
Well, look, I think as I mentioned at the onset, every country is figuring out how to use a technology like this for the benefits of its citizens. That's the obligation of a country, fundamentally. And that requires it to take certain actions that they're taking. And different countries are making different choices around these things. I think, can you really establish peace confidence? Do I take something somebody tells me at face value or not? I mean, there's a lot of these second and third order questions wrapped into all of these equations. So I'm a fan of control what you can and execute within that. We as a country have a lot of great assets at our disposal. We have 70% of the compute capacity in the world today have installed. We have the leading technology out there. We have the leading infrastructure, using my term, not your term, infrastructure out there. We have a lot of talent at our disposal. Look around the room. So we have a really, really strong hand to play this game with. We ought to focus on playing this game and winning on our own. And then I think the rest of it will figure it out. I think if we get into all these, we're well over 150 countries. We cannot figure out how to sort it all out. So that would be my view.
I like the framing. Is actually a natural framing to recap as we come to the very end. My final question is, we have many students in the audience. You look at unemployment rate for young people, it's lowest in a decade. Let me repeat that, lowest in a decade for young people. And I have a son who's a senior coming out next year in college, and I obviously spend time with undergrads and as well as the students, graduate students in public policy. We consider AI to be a structural disruptor in that regard, just to look at coding and so forth. So if you find yourself sitting in this audience and knowing what you know about AI, you're building AI, you are partnering with AI, you're building hyperscalers, you're talking to Chinese and building confidence, Amir, what would you advise to yourself about being able to get in the market and hopefully build a good, thriving career coming out of UT? So, Bakari, we'll start with you.
Yeah, if I was an audience member today and in my youth, I would be telling myself from this chair, always approach every sort of day or every opportunity with a growth mindset. Especially at Microsoft, Satya, our CEO, really instills that vision across the entire organization. And what that fundamentally means is that you're not going to be right all the time, but in every opportunity, every wall you run into, every challenge you face, you take a step back after that and ask yourself a simple question of, what did I learn from that? How can I do better next time? And that resilience, that grit, also something that fundamentally drives entrepreneurs. But even if that's not in the cards for you or not a design that you want to go after, I think successful people are fundamentally, if not wired that way, they train themselves to overcome and deploy that grit and resilience because they aren't, or frankly, they can be less afraid of looking in the mirror and saying, oh, that didn't work out so well. That's okay. It's quite okay. Just get up and do it again.
Thank you, Amir.
You need an anchor in life. Life is very tough. There'll be times that you'll be, tossed around. The anchors that I recommend usually are faith, family, and purpose, but everybody has their own. You can swap out what you like and replace it with what you like, worse or better, however you want to do it. That's your anchor. Then on top of that, what I would say is perseverance commands success. More than anything else, it is perseverance that commands success. not smarts, not fast talking, not any of these things, just not bloody well giving up and being there at all times and hitting it hard every single time. Perseverance commands success. And at the end of the day, what I would tell you is that there has to be a human element. There has to be an element of curiosity. There has to be a realization that you've been put on earth by some mystical force or a god or biology or evolutionary processes, whatever it is, in order to do something that no one has done before. You are a link in a chain of greatness. You are not one. You are not insignificant. You will not be forgotten. The way that you are can be a story to tell down the road. There's a lot of people today that think, oh, what are these stories of great? I think that's all crap. I think it's destroying the human story to say, I am just me and I came and I went. No, you impacted. You are a chain of greatness across generations. Find that spot, cement yourself to that spot, and make sure that your contributions last beyond you. And that is the way to live a full life, in my view. Even after you die, you shouldn't be dead. Your work should be there, delivering the value for you. And I think if you think about life that way, it suddenly becomes so optimistic. And I'm kind of getting excited now because I'm imagining sort of not being dead when I'm dead. So let me thank you. Thank you for. I think we should just stop it at that. Thank you for having me. In the short term, not the end and beyond, but given the structural shift in jobs going away, what would you advise yourself?
Look, I'll cite 3 stats and I'll answer your question. 60% of the jobs that exist today did not exist in 1940. 85% of all the jobs created since 1960 have been because of technology change in some form. When I went to drop off my twin daughters for college, they're both out of college now, 6 years ago. At one other college, they did not go here. One other college, the career counselor at the orientation said, research shows that all of you, on an average graduate starting today will have 7 different careers in their lifetime. Okay, what does it all mean? It really means, I think, what you were getting to. You cannot think of it as a fixed deterministic space. I'm a chemical engineer by training, but I'm not doing any chemical engineering now. So practically, what do you do? My advice, make sure that you use these tools. All of these tools have proliferated. All of these tools fundamentally change how you think about a problem. Most of us who have been in the workplace a long time think about the problem very linearly, and we tend to focus on that. You can actually imagine and envision what you want the end output to be and use these tools. So use these tools as much as you can. And number 2, get cross-functionally trained. Get your brain trained in cross-functional dimension rather than a linear one piece of it. But then again, that would be my general advice, and that's what I'm telling my kids right now.
So thank you for the practical, for the inspirational advice as well. As I wrap up, I have an announcement for the next session of our series. October 20th, Monday evening, same spot. Again, we appreciate McCombs allowing us to host this. Sure, thank you for your partnership of McCombs School of Business. And so we'll be talking about navigating shifting trade policy. It's a very timely topic. I'll have former Deputy Secretary of Commerce, one of my colleagues from the Business Administration, Don Graves, joining us. Mayor John Cohen of Brownsville, border town that has been impacted by the trade and tariffs what's going on. And third, we just recently were able to confirm a CEO of a logistics company who's Mexican-American, has a perspective on USMCA, which is actually under review right now. Very timely topic, disruptive to our economy in the country, but especially in Texas. I hope you will all join us. And there were these flyers on your seat. If you look at that, that has a schedule of events for the next 1 year. And as I said earlier, I hope this is a community we are building where you can partake in these conversations, and your reflections, your questions will be seen in these policy ideas that our graduate students are producing. And if I may ask the graduate students who are in my class to please stand up, I want to make sure we acknowledge them. They're going to be the steward of your work. So you guys, public policy leaders that will help us implement some of the great observations you heard on the panel. So let me thank Bakari, Amir, and
Thank you,
Vivek
Dilawar.
for-
Thank you.